Chapter 7. The Thunder God. Steady rain drummed rhythmically on the canvas around the dimly lit round table. Yuri's Black Sea monotone crawled into the colonel's ear. "Live in 3, 2. Prather pressed in the left side of his headset. "All right," he began, his voice still and warm. "We're going to jump back into things with Enoch here in a moment, but I want to get to some of the questions on the message board submitted by many of you on How Do I Register, the website Beyond Than Our Horizon with Colonel Stephen Prather. Com. He picked up a handwritten note from the pile in front of him, squinting slightly at the scrawled text. His own writing was difficult for him to read. The first question is for Linda Prince Pine from Jonius Chachi 44. Jonius Chachi 44 writes, "Ms. Pine, I have been waiting for you to write a sequel to Liquid Sabbath for 18 years. Since the world is about to end, do you think you could summarize the potential sequel?" Linda Prince Pine adjusted her cyan sleeves with precision. "That's a very good question," she said, pausing briefly for effect. "I have mixed news for you. I actually wrote 2 sequels 16 years ago, back to back, which I named Kingdom of the Plowshare Genesis and Iron Communion. But these were stolen by the actor Richard Jekyll shortly before his death." She exhaled with a slight shrug. "He renamed them and sold the rights, which I didn't discover until years after the fact. It all wound up as an Austrian animated series called Forge Keepers, Schmiedehüter in the original Österreichisches Deutsch. You might be able to binge some YouTube clips of the show before the power grid goes down." Colonel Prather leaned back in his chair. "Jekyll was so cagey," he said admiringly. Before Linda could reply, a discordance came through the speakers, followed by the clipped but unmistakable voice of Enoch Price. "Colonel, if I may interrupt." Enoch's tone struggled to maintain decorum. Prather straightened, his fingers hovering over the mixer as he replied, "Go ahead, Enoch, we read you." Enoch continued, carrying an uncharacteristic weariness. "Colonel, I must confess that my condition is weakening. I would have by this time consumed my daily dole of grey oyster salts, which I refer to sympathetically as Poseidon's alimony. These are dissolved in water and drunk each night with great ceremony." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Enoch's words hanging in the damp air. Prather's lips pursed, and he exchanged a glance with Linda Prince Pine, who was already reaching for her notebook. "There should be meal bar stations about every 10 feet. Enoch Prather shot back. "Have you tried those?" A despairing rattle preceded the response. "Pancho's meal bars are enticingly packaged, but explosive in their interaction with my intestinal tract. I left something of an homage to Jean-Paul Riopel's Vent du Nord in the men's room a few corridors down. I will regrettably require something of greater dietary stability." Linda flared her awkwardly tall frame outward towards Prather to confer. "What about the facility's guidebook, Stephen?" His head jerked as if hit in the neck by a softball. "Right, good point. Open that tub behind you." The drumming of the rain on the tent canvas seemed to grow, louder as Linda shuffled through a stack of dusty manuals, their covers worn and mismatched. Her long fingers paused on one, running over the embossed letters, barely visible in the dim light. Her eye tightened like a replicant from Philip K. Dick. "Okay," she said, holding up the first candidate, the Haig-McAllister Navigational Compendium for Christmas Atoll Operations. The colonel shook his head, leaning back in his chair as if the manual was offspring that had disappointed him. "No, that's a SeaWorld San Antonio Visitor's Guide. We slapped a cover on to get the boat loan." Linda arched an eyebrow, setting the manual aside. She reached for another. "Legacy Protocol Alpha, Emergency Access Map." Pastor Tamor Fawn-Ferrier perked up, his eyes brightening as he sat forward. "Oh, that's mine," he announced with misplaced pride. "Standard issue for the Church of St. Orville the Suspicious, Wilkesbury, I'm afraid." Linda resisted the urge to comment, her focus returning to the pile. Her hand landed on a manual with an unassuming grey cover. "Okay," she said with measured patience. "The Remnant Directive and Operational Map for the Christmas Island Subterranean Leisure Complex." Colonel Prather's face lit up with recognition. "That one will do," he said with a brisk nod. "Yeah, crack that sucker open. Enoch, look around. Can you tell me what color the walls are?" A flock of static preceded Enoch Price's theatrical reply. "One moment, if you will, Colonel," he began, his tone somber, turning behind him in the murky corridor and speaking to location floating in the air about a foot away. "Sweet Kathy Lee, I ask you to dissipate now, as I have matters of great import to attend to. Let us meet again, beneath the weeping tamarind of oblivion, in the afterlife, or the void itself. Goodbye, my sweet, curvaceous raven." A pause followed, punctuated only by the distant hum of machinery. "Yellow, Colonel, the walls are yellow." Linda flipped through the manual with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the diagrams and notes. "Level 2, she announced, her tone matter-of-fact. "Living quarters and dining." "That's a stroke of luck," Prather replied, straightening in his seat. "Let me see here." He tapped his fingers against the edge of the table as if orchestrating an unseen plan. "Just start following the side of the corridor with the stripes and numbers, Enoch." Linda's hands stilled on the page as her thoughts momentarily wandered. She realized with a pang of curiosity that Prather had never explained why he possessed such detailed materials about the island. His earlier ignorance about the arrangements on Christmas Island now seemed suspiciously rehearsed. Returning her attention to the manual, Linda adjusted her glasses and prepared to offer further instructions. Whatever mystery surrounded Prather's knowledge of the subterranean labyrinth could wait, at least until they got Enoch out of it. Metallic echoes of Price's footsteps cluttered around him through the dimly lit corridor as he advanced cautiously. The faint yellow glow of the walls cast contrast in his face as if he were a tachiyaku about to stroll on stage for a kabuki performance of Narukami. He brought the Kirov Sigma 900 to his lips. "Colonel, I see a mural of Darth Vader and Mr. Rogers wrapped in the sensual valley of erotic lovemaking." "Oh good," Colonel Prather interjected smoothly. "They finished it." Linda Prince Pine did not look up from the manual she was studying. "Enoch, keep on ahead. You should open up into one of the mini cafeterias in around 20 meters on your left." A few seconds passed, marked by the mushy shuffle of Enoch's progress. "It's very dim," his voice came again, laced with suspicion. "This must be it. What a stench." Linda adjusted her glasses, her voice calm and measured. "Straight onto the back wall. You should see a food service control panel with a koala bear illustration above it." "This odor in this compartment," Enoch replied after a brief pause, "is an eager cousin of the porta potty." "Yes, the koala." Linda spoke into the air. "Enoch, the panel will light automatically when you lay your palm onto the service." An electronic blip sounded over the connection. "It's asking for a sequence authorization phrase," Enoch reported, mixing curiosity and exasperation. "Yes, Enoch," Prather made a pyramid with his hands. "The sequence authorization phrase is sequence authorization phrase." Static danced over the beat of silence. "Diabolical." An unrhythmic tapping of keys was followed by another electronic blip. "It's now asking for sequence confirmation keyword," Enoch continued. Prather's tone did not waver. "That's love me share, no spaces." "Love. Me. Share." Enoch repeated slowly. "Very well." The sound of taps was punctuated by a confirming blip. "Yes," Linda had returned to her microphone. "You should see a menu now, Enoch." "Time to chow down, my friend," the Colonel added jovially. "It's a larger selection than I anticipated. Tapioca uprising, warm sardine mousse on melon wedges, clotted egg porridge with dill sauce. Normally, I would ravish these dishes like a disturbed colonist, but in my weakened state, they drive me to revulsion." Enoch's struggle bleated through the interference-heavy signal. Prather waved his finger forward like an EMF meter. "Enoch, buddy, I've got a cheat code you can direct dial for some biscuit wafers. How does that sound?" In the cramped modular cafeteria, the beads of sweat on Enoch's forehead suddenly cooled as if by a magical breeze. "Wafers. Yes, simple and plain. Like a Melville Whale anatomy chapter, that will suffice." "Enoch, the code is SLNTGR33N, the Colonel revealed excitedly. Price's fingers hovered over the keypad, his eyes narrowing as he keyed in the code. "GR33N, he muttered, the sound of each key press resembling water droplets on a wet towel. A soft electronic blip followed. He bowed and stretched his back optimistically. "Processing. Then, with a thump and sliding sound, the machine whirred to life. "Tasty wafers coming right up, my friend." A miniature of Prather's voice crawled like a hamster out of the Kirov Sigma's speaker holes. The whirring stopped. For a moment, there was silence in the dark cafeteria. "I wonder." Enoch reached in his pocket for his handkerchief, which was missing. At once, a thunderous boom ripped through the complex, shaking the walls and sending a cascade of dust from the ceiling. The sound reverberated through the cafeteria and down the labyrinthine corridors. Back at the round table, the portion of the tent where Father Tamor sat, partialed, collapsed. His shoulders and arms sat above the collapsed canvas. The colonel was momentarily startled when the pastor's head articulated and began to speak. "Oh, my lord, what was that?" The clergyman's voice quivered with alarm. Linda Prince Pine adjusted her glasses, her tone calm but speculative. "That could be a burst hydraulic coupling." "Or the devil," Tamor added with grim certainty. "It might be the devil." Another boom followed, even louder than the first, accompanied by a low, guttural rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Enoch," Linda said, flipping through the manual in front of her. "Based on these schematics, there should be a viewing panel for the complex camera array next to you. You should see a green square on the surface. Just press anywhere inside of it. Maybe you can get a look around the island." Enoch pressed his hand within the easy-to-find square. It was an astonishingly perfect fit. His eyes recoiled in the sudden light of 6 monitors bursting to radiance. They had laid in the darkness like the backs of beetles just above the panel he had been working at. "Yes, I found it," he replied, his voice tight with urgency. "It's affording me a—" Another deafening rumble filled the room. When it subsided, his scientific calm was tinged with awe and terror. "Oh, my dear God." He slowly lifted the phone receiver to his right ear, unable to find additional words immediately. "Told you those wafers were good," Prather's voice quipped through the receiver. Price tried to steady himself, but found his body trembling. "I am staring into the very eye of oblivion." "Did you check to see if they were expired?" Prather began to pull Fawn Ferrier awkwardly around the table and from underneath the collapsed canvas wall. Linda leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Enoch, can you see anything in the viewer?" Enoch's voice crackled in their headsets, breathless. "There are dozens of them, an armada rising into the sky. They don't seem real, silhouetted against the moonlit Pacific." Linda's tone took on an edge of urgency. "Just focus, Enoch, you've got this. Page 72 of the Dresden Codex depicts Arpush, the skeletal god of death, but he's not alone. He's surrounded by a host of ethereal beasts, each with their eyes cast upward. Do you see a gathering of—" "No," Enoch interrupted, his voice rising in pitch and increasingly disappointed. "These are projectiles of the mechanical variety." Linda's eyes roamed left, as if she was viewing a dossier hovering in the air next to her. "It could be the return of the bat god Kamazots, Stephen. Possibly his progeny, the Nahualak. A swarm of bat-headed serpents." Another boom shook the wet ground, and Enoch's voice bent with frustration through the broadcast signal. "No, no, no. Do you people not think I would recognize bat-headed serpents if they reared their heads?" Prather leaned forward, his expression intent. "Nukes, Enoch?" "Nuke. Wait a moment," Enoch began, his voice faltering in waves of interference. "Oh, those fools. They must have mistaken the—" "Mistaken what, Enoch?" Linda pressed, her voice taut with concern. "The stick-on wall placards, the clumsy koala stickers, the horrifically inept murals." "We've been duped, Colonel," Enoch said, his tone laced with bitter realization. "All of this was already here." "Quickly, Linda, what is the copyright on the remnant directive and operational map for the Christmas Island subterranean leisure complex?" Linda flipped through the manual, her fingers moving quickly. "It's 1982. "And its author?" Enoch asked, his voice tightening. Linda paused, her eyes widening. "Oh my, the United States Department of Fusion, Fisheries and Family Leisure." Tamor sat cross-legged in the damp grass inside the tent, his eyes hopeful, his headset cord straining to its last centimeter. "Doesn't sound unpleasant." "In its original form, perhaps, my holy friend," Enoch replied grimly through a sharp squeal. "But you see, The hucksters, the neo-carnies that promised to build a durable structure, simply set our camp complex atop a sleeping beast. Another thunderous boom echoed over the island, sending Linda spilling to the ground. "I'm fine." Prather stripped off his headset and turned on the large broadcast monitor seated in the center of the table. Only a light rain began to weave itself onto the speaker's surface through the compromised tent, now as if they were passing under the eye of a hurricane. Linda and the pastor slowly pulled off their headsets now as the speaker began to relay Enoch's tale. The much-lauded 320 porta potties, well, 319, if you exclude the one that collapsed like a cheap taco. The damned fools placed them over the old island defense array. They spent weeks before our arrival idiotically filling them with their putrid excrement. Worst of all, I seem to have inadvertently triggered some sort of launch sequence in my hunger for the plain wafer. Outside, flurries of 2 and 3 porta potties rocketed skyward, trailing a plume of fire and smoke as they ascended awkwardly into the clearing night sky. The island's perimeter defense system, the long-dormant and forgotten PNSS, or Pneumatic Nuclear Sled System, had been invoked. Championed by the long-deceased Senator Leland Beauregard from Montana, a winter sports enthusiast and chair of the Auxiliary Armed Services Pacific Creative Tourism Committee, or AASPCTC, from the 1960s to the 1980s, he had broken a bottle of champagne somewhere on the overgrown concrete to celebrate its christening. Boatloads of small aluminum-skinned nuclear water balloons that were to be a tactical projectile in the theater, should an attack occur, were never delivered, owing to the senator's untimely death in a walk-in freezer in April 1983. Now PNSS had at last come to life, machinery groaning and roaring as one by one, as it lofted the comparatively featherweight portable toilets, careening in a great ring away from the island, their trajectories forming a surreal and chaotic ballet. Listeners worldwide had hung on to a silence of 15 seconds, a near eternity. Then the colonel's voice returned. "Enoch, you just spent quite a lot of time in a porta potty. What can we expect? Will the tents protect us?" Even the static seemed cautious in the brief pause. Then a small laugh came across the monitor. "Oh no, that will not be our fate. We will only be captive witnesses to the catastrophe. Recall that this is an island perimeter defense array. There is only one logical target, even given the irregular ammunition employed." Linda sat back in her chair at the table, awash with realization, reciting blankly, "The Tony Danza Raft City at 279 degrees north, 156.39 degrees west." The pastor's khakis sank a little in the muddy grass. "Perhaps it's the Lord's vengeance for Teach Tony Danza. I understand it wasn't well received," he offered. "It's a different Tony Danza, Pastor." The colonel's voice rose suddenly as he slid back into his chair. "Where is the clock, Linda? What time is it?" 12:31. Linda's words deflated slightly as she closed her Mayan notes. Enoch's voice leapt out of the speaker, which was now creating an awful echo on the broadcast. Yuri had been impatiently trying to alert his distracted host over a headset that remained around Prather's neck. "Colonel," the voice spoke from the labyrinth, "there are helicopters and boats, a gaggle of them. They seem to bear the insignia of authorities of one variety or another." Prather at last pulled up the headset over his ears, met with Yuri repeating the words helicopters and boats in different shades of monotone. "Yuri, get out to the dinghy." Prather only heard a Slavic sigh on the other side, but assumed the request was being honored. Linda, cognizant of the listening audience and in a sudden surge of self-awareness, offered, "Yes, the least we can do is to get back to the Marisol too and take part in assistant efforts." "For who?" A thick confusion formed in the colonel's eyes. She smiled as if being photographed. "The Tony Danza, Raft City." The confusion turned to quiet conspiracy. "You bet." Under the belly of the island, Enoch Price had been walking, leaving the cafeteria having eaten nothing at all. Without fanfare, he finally reached the end of a corridor which integrated into interlocking concrete shapes all resembling a fragment of Bauhaus gone amok. There before him was white iconography for a staircase, and to its right 3 color blocks. The bottommost read, "Engineering and Operations," grey letters on a blue background. In the middle, a yellow block gave his current floor's identification, and then above it, an orange block reading Leisure and Contemplation. He flipped the Sigma 900 closed. The Colonel would understand. Solitude was a necessary atmosphere out of which he could only survive for limited stretches among others of the human or another species. The moment had arrived to unstrap the regulator, unmount the oxygen tank and surface. Slipping the phone in his pocket, he pulled the stairwell door open, climbing upward as it closed. The front flaps of the tent were open now. The post-storm petrichor filled Prather's nostrils pleasantly as he continued. We are, according to Yuri, starting to pick up chatter from the Australian Border Force maritime units and the Christmas Island Coastal Authority, so we're going to wrap up here and wish everyone a happy and healthy apocalypse. The tent was a flurry of activity, Linda Prince Pine furiously stuffing her notebooks and personal effects into a weathered leather satchel. Pastor Timur Fawn Ferrier, still damp from the humidity and wearing an enormous stain on. His back and buttocks from his time on the ground crammed an array of mismatched items into his rucksack with an urgency that spoke to impending disaster. A big thanks to Stephanie and Yuri and my colleagues, Linda Prince Pine, Enoch Price, and Pastor Timur Fawn Ferrier. Prather's voice continued, rising above the rustling of papers and the light metallic clang of the pastor's water bottle whipping around and clipping the microphone boom. Additional thanks to Prone Commando Catering. Sorry the squid cakes didn't work out, but maybe we'll look you up for the Apophis watch party. Linda slung her satchel over her shoulder, her expression a mix of focus and annoyance. Timur, leave the muffins. There's no time. One, damn you, Timur replied indignantly, clutching a trifecta of the applesauce-infused confections to his chest as if holy relics. Prather's voice, calm and measured, carried on. Naturally, we thank all of the fine folks that dialed in, and I hope we provided you with useful information and a little comfort. Tomorrow night's show will be broadcast from aboard the Marisol 2. The pastor stumbled slightly as Linda pulled him toward the tent flap. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying with it the far-off buzzing of engines. Boats, perhaps helicopters, growing closer with each passing moment. Cosmic steelworker and founder of Local 27 Cosmic Welders Union, Eugene Torbatod, has been enjoying the pump room for the past 72 hours, so we'll let him out to get a little lunch and chat with him about his new reality show Desperate Welds. That's going to be a dynamite program, folks. The memory of the broadcast hung in the air as the three of them burst out into the stormy night, sprinting awkwardly through the darkness toward the waiting dinghy. Yuri's silhouette, hunched and impatient, loomed at the edge of the water, his flashlight cutting a jagged path through the spotty rain. Having harvested equipment from the dormant installation, the complicated array of terrestrial encoding, decoding, and satellite relays delayed broadcast for several minutes. Prather's voice echoed faintly over a pocket radio somewhere in the dark hull bottom, overlapping with the furious splashes as the trio clambered into the dinghy. Until then, do not allow the ordinary distractions to thwart your search for wisdom and knowledge. Yuri started the motor with a sharp pull, and the small vessel surged forward into the roiling waves. All that and more may just be revealed beyond the near horizon. Good night. The Marisol 2 loomed ahead, its silhouette barely discernible against the inky expanse of the Pacific. The dinghy bumped against its side, and the three scrambled aboard, slipping and sliding on the rain-slick deck. Linda and the pastor disappeared below to their quarters without a word, their judgmental conversation descending in the metal stairwell. Prather lingered on the deck, eyeing the stocky Danish captain who gave orders under his breath to the man at the helm. The colonel's eyes carried over the cluster of discrete lights on the steerage and communications dashboard, and out through the window to the glow of searchlights dancing over the churning waters, accompanied by the distant thrum of helicopter blades. The Marisol 2, her lights extinguished, began to slip away into the darkness, her engines humming softly as she made for open water. Back at the lost anchor, Jess crowded jerky sticks into a jar. The exit music for the broadcast loitered in the background. A dejected Whiskers slipped through the entrance onto the slate-grey sidewalk outside without notice. "There's an hour I'm not getting back," Eddie bleated softly. Shirt Tail swallowed 2 fingers of Diplomatico Reserva. "And yet here you are." Mitchie approached the bar, stretching his back. The centipede console he left was still an unresuscitated patient. Dry sherry in a small, if you please, Jess. He watched her pour the drink while he placed $7 on the bar. World's not ended. Again. Only because we remain watchful, Shirttail added. Eddie rose up in a gargling laugh to finally take his leave. It ain't just the drinks diluted around here. The men all bobbed their heads in one direction or another as the door squeaked open and thumped closed. Jess would take his money again in around 17 hours and ignored her end of the insult. Shorttail suddenly made eye contact with Jess, which was unusual. The world is nothing without believers and heroes. Jess rolled her eyes off his, bent down and rose to set down a rack of rock and highball glasses from the dishwasher onto the bar top. She picked up the first to start toweling it dry, eyes on the glass. "Am I right?" he continued. She looked up, considered answering, then thought better of it. When morning arrived in bright rays near the Kiritimati Atoll, the breeze was relatively calm for open water. Only a few retreating cumulus to the east suggested anything had occurred the preceding night. The Pacific lapped at an enormous array of roughly 80 rafts, tethered together by various means and having some type of makeshift superstructure beneath. A motley assortment of tents and even small shacks sat atop the formidable and yet fragile gathering somewhere very near 2.79 degrees north, 156.39 degrees west. At the southwest-facing corner of the assembly, two children huddled around a third who was fishing something out of the water. Approaching them was a small group of adults, among them a noticeably tall and objectively handsome, dark-skinned man dressed as an 18th-century British general. "Children, step away from the edge, please." The imposing man gestured to a young couple standing behind him. "Stuart, Haley, please, keep them away from the edge." He took a few broad steps forward to the very edge between raft bindings and ocean. A noticeable motion swayed his measured descent to one knee as he knelt towards a boy of 17. The image, the boy held his glinting catch upward in his open palm. "Is it a god, Mr. Danza?" The great man now retrieved the trinket and held it aloft as he straightened and stood effortlessly on the moving corner of civilization at his feet. Modern machining. This is factory-made, 21st century. He rotated the shape in his hand, then raised his eyebrow. The boy looked up. Not a god. An expression of pure curiosity unfolded in the man's intense brown eyes. "I think it's Lyle Lovett."